Human, get in here. We're starting.
Calm down. This guy agreed to work with us. You don't want to make him quit on his first video.
Oh, please. He should be grateful he's getting the privilege of spending time with the great Sterenpike von Gorman III.
Great is not a word anyone has ever used to describe a 4-foot-tall goblin with an annoying voice and ridiculous hair.
My hair is spectacular.
Would you chill out already, Pax? Would you do that shock thingy?
It would be my pleasure.
Ah! What the heck?
Look, just behave yourself, okay? You're lucky I'm doing this. I'm a software developer. I don't like talking to anyone, really.
Sounds like we have a lot in common. Ah! What is that?
What?
That thing right there!
Where?
That thing resting on your shoulders!
I don't have anything on my shoulders.
It's right behind your glasses!
Are you talking about my face?
That's your face? Why does it look like that?
Pax, can you just...
On it.
Ah!
Look, just keep the insults to a minimum, okay? We got a lot to talk about today.
So what's your deal, human? Couldn't stand being one of the few chubby white guys left in America who didn't have a YouTube channel dedicated to airing your grievances?
Something like that.
Let's see. Action figures any grown man should be embarrassed to own? Check. Fantasy books to establish nerd cred? Check. And a few historical novels to make sure people take your opinions on history somewhat seriously? Check. No doubt about it. Middle-aged YouTuber.
Look, can we just start today's video? We're a minute into this lesson about the Renaissance and all we've done is bicker. Most people have probably tuned out by now.
No, I would bet most people tuned out as soon as they saw that thing you call a face.
Pax? Alright, so let's talk about the Renaissance. And more specifically, see if we can't find an answer to this question. Is the Western world once again on the verge of a rebirth, or are we slowly drifting into a new dark age? But I also think that most of you would agree that the world's a very scary place right now. And I think it's safe to say that nobody really knows what the next 10 or even 5 years are going to bring. And the reason why should really be obvious to anybody that's watching this in the year 2026. The stability and order that has governed the world for the better part of 80 years seems to be breaking down. Artificial intelligence, for all of its utopian promises, will probably also make us all lazy and stupid, or worse, take all of our jobs and then kill us.
Sounds like I arrived in your world just in time. After society collapses, you'll all bow at the feet of your new Goblin Emperor.
And such stinky feet they are.
Hey!
Now, look, despite all of that, there could be some great things on the horizon. I mean, if we're going to figure out where we're going, we kind of need to first understand where we've been by appreciating what the Renaissance actually was. And we need to understand what made it happen. It wasn't just about art. It was so much more than that. Let's travel back to the year 1453. Picture this. You're a nobleman or a scholar living within the impenetrable walls of the ancient city of Constantinople, known today as Istanbul. Now, for nearly 2 months, your city has been under siege from the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Mehmed II and the full might of his army. The last Roman king, Constantine XI, is dead, fallen in battle when the Ottoman Turks finally managed to breach the walls. After allowing the soldiers to ransack his city for 3 days, slaughtering and enslaving many thousands of men, women, and children, the Sultan, in his infinite mercy, allowed any who had survived to return to their homes. Now, while there were some who chose to stay and live under the rule of their new conquerors, many grabbed what few possessions they had remaining to them, such as a vast collection of rare books filled with Greek wisdom, long forgotten to the western half of Europe, and flee to a city that they had visited just 14 years earlier, Florence. Now, many of the refugees had fond memories of a certain powerful banker there named Cosimo de' Medici, a man who had met with many dignitaries and scholars from Byzantium, eager to recover the wisdom of the ancients. And thus, after one of the greatest tragedies of the Western world, Florence would rise to become the new Athens. And why Athens, you ask? Well, To be brief, during the 5th century BC in Greece, the city of Athens exploded with art, literature, and science in a cultural revolution rarely seen in one place in human history. And when the Romans eventually conquered them, Greek literature spread to every corner of the Roman world. But when the Western Roman Empire fell in the late 5th century AD, much of that wisdom was lost for over 1,000 years, taken and preserved in the cities like Constantinople. Hence why people used to refer to the Middle Ages as the Dark Ages. Now, before the fall of Constantinople, many in the Western Europe had longed for some of the lost Greek and Roman wisdom, but after nearly 100 years of plague and war, it was going to take one thing in particular to rebuild and rebirth this world: money. Enter the Medicis, a wealthy family of bankers who had risen to power in Florence in the decades prior to the fall of Constantinople. One of the first things they did was start buying up manuscripts from many of these refugees fleeing the oppression of the Ottomans. Combine that with the recent invention of the printing press in Germany in 1440, and an eager public hungry for literature, and you have the beginnings of a cultural revolution.
Wait, a bunch of rich bankers are responsible for the Renaissance?
I mean, that's simplifying a little, but yeah.
So why can't I go rob a bank in order to use the money to create my own personal Renaissance?
What kind of Renaissance?
Papa needs a new scooter!
So what else was the Renaissance about if it wasn't just art and literature? Well, let's go back to some of those books that those rich bankers and other collectors were searching for. Even though it was the Medici that had the most profound impact on the discovery and collection of ancient manuscripts, it was a movement that had already been going on in Florence since 1417. In his recent book, The Swerve, Stephen Greenblatt makes an argument that what we call the Renaissance, and even really the modern world, can be traced back to the discovery of one ancient manuscript by the Italian Florentine scholar Poggio Bracciolini. Poggio Bracciolini.
Wow, so cultured.
You're one to talk. You get tongue-tied reading the back of a cereal box.
Some of those chemicals we're feeding the kitties are hard to pronounce.
The manuscript in question, De Rerum Natura, or On the Nature of Things, was discovered moldering away in a remote German monastery. And what is On the Nature of Things about, you ask? Just a 1st century BC poem by the Roman philosopher Lucretius, explaining the Greek philosophy of Epicureanism. And what the heck is Epicureanism? Well, that's a subject I could make a whole video about, but short answer, the belief that even if there are gods or a god, they didn't create the universe, and everything is made up of atoms, and there's a natural cause for most anything that we would ascribe to divine intervention. And yet, while this and other ancient thought would lay the groundwork for the Enlightenment, Judeo-Christian teachings still had an enormous part to play. And if a big part of Epicureanism was emphasizing the humanity of your fellow man, then it stands to reason that the art those humans would make concerning the God of Abraham and Christ was about to become much more personal and divine than it had been in previous centuries. Two of the most famous artists who brought humanity screaming back into painting of the divine are, of course, the two almost everyone who knows even a little bit about the Renaissance can name: Leonardo and Michelangelo.
Ninja Turtles.
No, just try not to talk, okay? You're not adding anything intelligent to the conversation.
Wait, they weren't mutant turtles?
It's not even a funny joke. It's too obvious.
I'm willing to bet at least one person watching this laughed at that. And that person probably lives in Toledo, Ohio.
Look, no Toledo jokes, please.
Want me to zap him?
No, it's fine. Let's just keep going. Let's talk about Michelangelo first. Noticed for his talent by the Medicis at a very early age, Michelangelo is often called the greatest artist that ever lived, and I would tend to agree with that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Renaissance brought humanity back into the divine. Art for most of the Middle Ages, even in the early Renaissance of the 1300s, has still been somewhat stuck in the past when depicting the Virgin Mary, Christ, or really any scene from the Bible. But if we had to focus on just one image from a lifetime of phenomenal work, it would be this. This one image of the Sistine Chapel, the creation of Adam. You all have seen this at some point in your life. I know you have. And yet, how many of you actually really appreciate it for what it really is? You see, what makes this image so remarkable is not just the fact that God is depicted as a living being with flesh and blood, instead of some intelligence without form outside of time, but the fact that he is reaching out to Adam with an extended finger and hoping that Adam will simply extend his index finger just a little to meet him. Now, it's kind of hard to put into words just how profound this is. Okay, originally he was only supposed to paint pictures of the 12 apostles, but Michelangelo, never one to rest on his laurels, saw an opportunity to change the way in which we view God. It's just one example of the ideas about mankind in general that the medieval church taught, that we are fallen and contemptible creatures of mud and sin and rot, and shifting instead to divine sons and daughters of God, born to share in his glory, and that man might even be able to become like God. Truly revolutionary stuff at the time. Oh, and just a side note, Michelangelo famously hated painting. In fact, he hated painting in general. He considered himself more of a sculptor. So I find it humorous that he seems to have spent 4 years on his back painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, simply because he wanted to spite his enemies, whom he suspected got the commission for him because they wanted to see him fail.
That's nothing. I've completed lots of difficult things out of spite.
Such as?
I read an entire book once, just because my friend said I couldn't. It was the most difficult thing I've ever done. I mean, that thing was nearly 100 pages. It took me 10 months.
Well done. We'll move on to Leonardo da Vinci now. If Michelangelo was the greatest artist of the Renaissance, Leonardo was the greatest mind. Okay, look, there's not much more that I could say about the man that hasn't already been said. Born just north of Florence 1 year before the fall of Constantinople, Leonardo arguably became one of the most well-known and really the most amazing humans that really kind of ever lived. I mean, at the height of his fame, he was well regarded by most authorities and dignitaries in Florence, not just as a painter, but also as an engineer and architect. And when we say the word Renaissance man, usually people think of him, and for good reason. One of the remarkable things a man of Leonardo's talents could do was attend a staged debate featuring the rich and powerful of society, known as a paragon. If you had to compare them to anything in our modern times, they would sort of act like, I don't know, ancient TED Talks or something like that. But instead of simply going viral on YouTube, you could present your arguments in front of the rich and powerful of society who might become your patron, which is how just about all of the artists in the Renaissance actually made a living. Now, to paraphrase some of the arguments that Leonardo actually made to some of the most powerful people in Florence, Walter Isaacson wrote, "Creative endeavors had been divided since antiquity into two categories, the mechanical arts and the more exalted liberal arts. Now, painting has been classified as mechanical because it was a craft based on handiwork, like that of goldsmiths and tapestry weavers. Leonardo refuted this by arguing that painting is not only an art, but also a science. Indeed, one need only flip through any of these sketches in his notebooks to see that the man truly was operating on a level that most in history rarely ever did. But if we are to ever have another Renaissance in the West, we all need to be trying to think this way. To quote Walter Isaacson again, Leonardo had a free-range mind that merrily wandered across all the disciplines of the arts, sciences, engineering, and humanities. I've always tried to do this in my own life. I mean, it's kind of funny because when I actually started my career as a graphic designer and then eventually drifted into software development, long story, most people thought I was crazy, but it kind of made perfect sense to me. I mean, I was kind of just trying to be like Leonardo and all the other Renaissance artists, but Leonardo in particular.
Wait, are you comparing yourself to Leonardo?
No, I just mean he inspired me to try and marry art and technology together in a new and innovative ways and stuff. You know, kind of like what Steve Jobs said, you know, that think different or something. I don't know.
Uh-huh. And how's that going for you? Change the world yet?
I mean, I could make a pretty nice user interface for accountants.
Real revolutionary, this one.
I'm ignoring you now. So now that I've overly simplified something that is actually quite complex, and side note, we'll be doing that a lot on this channel because, you know, TikTok attention spans. Why is it important to understand what the Renaissance was really all about? I believe when you really sum up everything that we've discussed, and these are the three things that I think will help us in our current era of world-changing technology and political turmoil. Innovation and discipline, rather than resting on long-held traditions. Freedom of the mind to pursue that which is natural instead of adhering to dogmatic teachings from authority, and yet somehow still combining the natural with the divine. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, you know, so what? I'm just a no-talent nobody, and the Renaissance was about rich guys and talented guys reshaping the world around them. But that's where you would be wrong. The Renaissance never would have actually worked without the active participation of everyday average folks. You know, printers could not have succeeded without a public eager to read their books. Merchants, bankers sought to adapt new ideas into their everyday business dealings, making their shops and institutions more efficient and productive, which then helped the society to continue to thrive. Even simple craftsmen sought out classical motifs so they could incorporate them into something as simple as a table or a chair. And keep in mind, almost all of those famous artists had their own workshops, filled with apprentices. Everyday average nobodies that most of us have never even heard of, and they're just kind of lost to history. You know, Michelangelo could never have actually finished the Sistine Chapel without the scores of other craftsmen working under his careful tutelage. In other words, the Renaissance was not just a top-down movement forced upon the masses. Everyone was caught up in it. Everyone made it spread. So much so that even long after the Medici faded from power and influence, the ideas they helped spread throughout their patronage took over all of Europe, bringing the world into a new light. So, back to my original question. Are we on the verge of a new Renaissance, or are we about to plunge into a terrible dark age? Let's just kind of get the bad stuff out of the way first. And I'm speaking to my fellow Americans primarily, but also to my European friends, even though as of this video, I think we're still friends. I don't know. It kind of changes from week to week with this administration. People often compare America to Rome. While I don't think that's exactly a perfect one-to-one comparison, I mean, it's not for nothing. When trying to explain why Rome fell, historians and scholars have written countless books on the subject, and I'm not going to go into all of those reasons here. But for the purposes of this video, I want to focus primarily on the cultural reasons Rome fell. Now, even that subject alone is enough to fill an entire book, so I'll boil it down to a few easy-to-digest ideas. 1. In the early days of the empire after the Republic fell, Rome pretty much peaked from an artistic standpoint. Writers like Virgil had already written the Aeneid and other works by about 20 BC, and after that, writing started to become somewhat formulaic. I mean, creative freedom was simply becoming rare, you know. Compare that to America today, where Hollywood hasn't been able to put out an original idea for the better part of almost 30 years. I mean, be honest. Are any of you really that excited for the new Avengers movie? I mean, really? 2. As the slow decline continued in the Roman Empire, architecture kind of became really grand, but also stilted. And don't even get me started on comparisons to American architecture, unless you want to see me throw Pike out the window here.
Hey!
Be my guest.
I mean, seriously, just look at this building in the town I live in. This is officially the most uninspiring building in all of the Western world. Anyways, 3, education itself became stilted, and the students were taught more to recite rhetoric or memorize writings and poems as opposed to actually thinking about new things or just being curious about the world around them. I mean, I feel like I experienced the same thing when I was a student. They simply kind of just teach you how to follow rules and how to be a worker, an employee, not really a self-reliant thinker. And I see young kids going through the same thing now, but kind of worse. I mean, it's gotten so bad in our modern education system. We have kids going to college who literally can't read. Now, sadly, this is not new. The decline of reading, writing, and just plain thinking has been a problem across the Western world in general for the better part of 100 years now. George Orwell wrote about this all the way back in 1946, when talking about the decline of the English language that was happening just in his day. He wrote, "It becomes ugly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish, but the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. The point is that the process is reversible." Something like AI is only going to make this worse. I mean, as a software developer, while I've been able to see how it can certainly be helpful, I'm generally much more weary of it than excited. Let me play a brief clip for you from a recent Ezra Klein interview.
There's no prompt that would have told me, just go read more books, man. You're not there. You haven't gone far enough. I'm not saying AI can't be useful. Not saying it won't be useful. But I think I'm pretty against shortcuts. And obviously you have to limit the amount of work you're doing. You can't read literally everything. But in some ways, I think it's more dangerous to think you've read something that you haven't than to not read it at all.
And that's the problem. Now, look, I'm what you kids would call old.
Ah, come on. They'd probably call you fat before they call you old.
Okay, that was just hurtful.
And yet true.
Look, I've read a lot of books in my life, okay? I've written a lot of code as well. I'm really worried about kids coming out of school these days who could barely read when they went into college and then they just sort of chat GPT'd their way through every semester. People are just having AI write simple emails at work. So-called creative writers are writing whole books just using prompts. I mean, how long before nobody really knows much of anything? And we just become the fat people in space watching videos like that Pixar movie. And yet we're told we must win the AI fight against China, and so we've given carte blanche to our corporate overlords, allowing them to data mine the works of human creativity. Let's contrast that with the Medicis for a minute, okay? They were rich and powerful and actually cared about knowledge and beauty. Who are our rich cultural aficionados? I mean, it's certainly not any of the tech bros. If anything, they seem to be actively trying to kill art. I doubt Sam Altman or Bill Gates or even Elon Musk care one whit about all the artists and writers whose works they've stolen from in order to train their large language models to, quote, democratize creativity. I wonder how much they would like it if we stole all their proprietary technology and made it public. At what point do we stop intentionally harming our society? It doesn't take nearly as long as you think for a civilization to collapse. To quote Will Durant from his book, The Lessons of History, civilization is not inherited. It has to be learned and earned by each generation anew. And if the transmission should be interrupted for 1 century, civilization would die, and we would be savages again.
This is great!
What?
What?
Stupid people are easier to conquer. So go on, humans. Keep using AI to learn nothing. It will make it so much easier for me to take over the world when...
Sorry about that. Continue, please.
So how do we solve this? If we somehow manage to get through the next few years without blowing up the world, what comes next? I mean, maybe the advancement of AI won't kill us all. The printing press was a disrupting technology in its day and educating the common man in a way never before done, bringing about the Renaissance and eventually the Reformation and the Enlightenment. But here's the thing, we have to choose what to do with this brave new world. We have to choose to dedicate ourselves to lifelong learning. We have to choose to put down our phones, buy physical books and actually read them. We have to choose to study history, literature, and actively attain spiritual fulfillment. We can pursue that which will gratify the soul in the long term, rather than debase ourselves with short-term satisfaction. We can become Renaissance men and women, and that means being passionate about something other than the latest video game or stupid TikTok dance. Let me end by talking a little bit about Michelangelo one last time. The man was, by all accounts, hard to get along with. He constantly wrote about how much pain he was in, given how much he committed to his work, often at the neglect of his health. And when carving his most famous sculpture, David, he said to have held the hammer and chisel in place for so long that his hands would often bleed, mixing with the dust of the marble gathered at his feet. But he kept going, despite all the pain. He kept going because his passion wouldn't let him stop. So today, my question to you all is simply this. What are you willing to bleed for?
What are you doing?
What?
You're being weird.
What? I thought it was a good dramatic pause, like end on a bang.
End on a what?
Shut up.